these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office, experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all, in-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Welcome back, everybody. Another great episode, this time on an issue that you hear about a lot, the Uyghur Muslim genocide in China. We've done episodes on this before, but never before we had an actual survivor of these atrocities. So, Nury, thanks so much for being here today. Today we have Nury Turkel. I want to read a little bit about your bio, and then we'll get right into it. You're an attorney, author, foreign policy expert. You have 2 decades of experience working in these intersections of law, business, government, and the human rights community. I met you at the White House Correspondents' Dinner recently. Said,
Right.
"Hey, let's have a conversation," because I've hit this issue before, but never from a perspective like you have. And so, well, we don't have a ton of time today, unfortunately, because we got votes coming up. But I want to spend the bulk of our time really making it personal. Like, I want to paint a picture for people what this has really been like.
Yeah.
And how it's escalated over time. So, how long? Let's see. Where do we even start? Where is Xinjiang province? What can you tell us about this province and its people? And maybe what's the 30-second history over the last 50 years that gets us to this point?
The official name for the region is called Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. It's one of the 5 autonomous regions within People's Republic of China. It's geographically situated in the heart of Central Asia.
Okay.
Strategically, it's a key area to China. Is
that because of why? Resources, location?
Natural resources, and also easy access to Eurasian natural resources, and also easy access to Central Asian and European market. So the Uyghur homeland, Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, that Uyghurs call East Turkestan, is about the size of Western Europe, 4 times the size of California. That gives you an idea how big, how massive land region is this. Historically, the Chinese have been very brutal, repressing Uyghur people's fundamental rights, that including right to practice their religion, speak their language. But since 2016, specifically 4 years after Xi Jinping took office, they ratcheted up. They turned into this region, as the State Department correctly described, as an open-air prison. In addition to this mass detention facilities that they set up, former Secretary Pompeo likened it to, it says specifically that this is the largest incarceration of ethno-religious minorities since the Holocaust.
So Uyghurs have been in this region forever, forever meaning in modern history. I mean, how long?
We're talking about centuries. If you go to Turkey, go to the National Archives, the historical museums, you'll see Uyghur history. The Uyghurs have been living there since 7th, 8th century. They initially lived in the Central Asian steppes and then settled in this area during the Mongol era. One of Genghis Khan's 4 sons.
Has there ever been a good time for Uyghurs living under Chinese rule? Obviously, it's gotten a lot worse in the last few years, which we'll talk about. But has it ever been good?
I would say yes. During the 1980s, I talked about it in my book. Even some scholars call it the golden period.
Right.
This was after the Cultural Revolution, and when the Huyaobang, a moderate leader who died, that resulted in the pro-democracy movement in 1989, was pretty lax in his grip in this region. I witnessed the Uyghur homeland being turned into kind of cultural revival center.
Yeah.
We've seen.
So what was it like? Where people had jobs?
Yeah, I had
access
jobs.
to movies. What was the reason I ask is Central Asia. This is a common issue across Central Asia. You look at Afghanistan. You look at Iran. Where Afghanistan used to be this unbelievably modern and prosperous place in like the 50s, 60s, 70s, kind of before Iran, same thing. and you look at it now, and you can't even imagine that being true. So that's why I ask. I'm curious if it's similar.
That's a great question. This is also something that I say in public that the Chinese policymakers look at to see. There was a life for the Uyghur people. They were able to practice their religion, able to speak their language. They also were able to educate, get education in Uyghur language, which is me. I received my primary, secondary education in Uyghur language. And no one forced me to learn Chinese, but I did spend a lot of time studying Chinese, even went to inland China to receive my college education. There was no violence, there's nothing. People were left alone for the most part, except for the political pressure.
How different is the language? Is it?
The Chinese and Uyghur language is fundamentally different. The Uyghur language closest dialect is the Uzbek.
Okay, totally different alphabet.
Very different. Totally Uyghurs use 3 different alphabets: Arabic, Cyrillic, and Latin.
Okay.
I was educated in Latin alphabet, and then they switched to Arabic, and then Central Asia.
Just trying to confuse everyone as much as possible.
So yes, Radio Free Asia today, for example, put all 3 alphabets on their web version of their news articles.
Interesting. So the alphabets are just used to phonetically sound out the same word, though.
Yeah, there's a lot of Latin terminology in Uyghur language, all the scientific terms like mathematics, physics, chemistry, radio, television, that sort of terminologies are all from Latin. So we still use that as part of the modern Uyghur language.
Interesting. Okay. So Xi Jinping takes power, and things start to change for this region. What was the impetus for that? I mean, have Uyghurs ever rebelled? Have they ever given the Chinese government significant problems? What was to put on all this work to create a police state? They must perceive some massive threat.
So that's a great question. Xi Jinping comes to power in 2012, and he asked around his policy advisors. Usually in China, the policy advisors are academics, part of the Social Science Academy, both in Urumqi, which is the Uyghur capital, and Beijing. So he was asked to change the policy, because previous to that policy shift, they were using carrot and stick, allowing Uyghurs to have some space for families and some societal, cultural activities. And then the advice was that the Uyghurs will potentially pose a political threat that would undermine the Communist Party and Xi Jinping's power. So in 2014, this is something that Matt Pottinger often brings up, that they came up with a national security strategy. And 2 things were very clear in that national security strategy that some of our policymakers don't even bother to look at today in Washington. One is slow growth. So slow growth means that economic development being hampered, and any cause, any justification that need to be preserved. The growth need to be maintained. Otherwise, the CCP's ruling power would be questioned. The other aspect is foreign encirclement. Xi Jinping made that very clear in early March. So in this foreign encirclement aspect, they look at the ethno-religious identity, religious beliefs, specifically Abrahamic religion, Christianity and Islam, perceived as a potential threat or cause for political upheaval. So his advisors came up with something called preemptive policing, likening religious belief, ethno-religious cultural appreciation, sort of a infectious disease. If it's not taken out, it will spread the population. So that's why they use medical metaphor often. And then that period from 2014 to 2016, the region experienced some violent incidents. That's
in response.
Yes, and then in 2016, he deputized this brutal person that our government sanctioned under Global Magnitsky Act, Chen Zhuangguo. He gave him all the authorities, all the tools, means to set up this massive surveillance apparatus. Starting in August 2016 onward, just rounded up. Everyone should be rounded up.
Yeah, I want to get into the details on that, because your book goes into some really interesting details. But I still want to back up. I mean, so you were born in a Maoist labor camp.
Yeah, re-education camp.
What year were you born?
Well, I was born in 1970. When my mother was taken in, she was in her 3rd trimester, pregnant with me. And I was born in September 1970.
So paint us a picture of China in 1970 and why you were in a Maoist labor camp?
There are two reasons. It's very similar, Congressman, like what we experience in today, guilt by association. So my mother, my paternal grandfather was the Uyghur revolutionary who served in the East Turkestan Republic, in Second East Turkestan Republic, was established with the help of Stalin's Soviet Union in 1944.
Okay.
And that he never gave up that desire to establish Uyghur homeland. So they kept that in the profile. So when they were going out to social elites and intellectuals in 1970s, they rounded up everyone from my mother's side. My grandfather was sent to another re-education camp. Because of my mom's close relationship with her father, she was targeted. And then while this was happening, they took my university educator father to labor camp. And his guilt was that he had siblings in the Soviet Union. As you know, in the 1960s, the Mao's China and Stalin's Soviet Union relationship soured, and they just become very confrontational. So they went after the people who have family members in the Soviet Union. So both of them, my mom and dad, were taken into the camps, labor camp, re-education camp, because of their family connection. Much like today, if you look at the type of people taken into the camp today, you'll be surprised how similar the policy is. Like 50 years later, this is why I put no escape on the cover of my book, making the case that I have not been able to escape this brutal regime, even though now I'm an American citizen serving in the US government and a free person, and I've been retaliated. And also wanted to make the case with that, suggesting that people in our society, around the world, in the free world, can no longer say that they're not connected to this, or they can escape this reality. So that was the reason.
And how do they how do they implement this sort of no escape situation for you? Do you see do you see agents of the CCP coming after you in the U.S.?
Yes.
Do you see them threatening your family? Your family is still all back?
I have. It's been an honor. It's been a privilege to be able to exercise my freedom in the United States as an immigrant in the past 20 years to advocate for human rights for my people and others. Since my service started in the U.S. government in May 2020, China has been very, very aggressive. They initially tried to force me to resign, which I refused, and then they put travel restriction on my late father and my mother, subjecting to DNA collection, daily retaliatory actions. And in December 2021, they sanctioned me, along with 6 other commissioners at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. As you know, that several members of Congress and former government officials, including Secretary Pompeo and Matt Pottinger, were also sanctioned. So that's one way. And the other way is that holding my mom as a hostage. I testified at the Select Committee hearing in March. I shared with the world that I said goodbye to my late father and my mom several years ago, knowing that we may not see each other again. So I haven't seen my mother 19 years. She was here with my late father for my law school graduation in summer 2004, and that was it. And my mom has 5 U.S. born grandchildren. Yeah. She had only met one. And I always have a hard time to explain to my 6-year-old when he pointing at the pictures of my late father and my mom, like, when do I meet them? I shared some of the stories with Secretary Blinken about 2 years ago. That's the kind of the retaliatory actions. And also, they, to this day, despite all of this senior level engagements and involvement from our government, previous administration, this administration, they're just not letting my mom go. She's 73. She lost her husband of 53 years last April. I was in Uzbekistan as part of the U.S. delegation. Because I was sanctioned, because I'm sanctioned, I could not go to, the geography. Urumqi to Tashkent is essentially an hour flight. I could not be there to pay respect for my father and hold my mom to mourn. So the psychological, torturous experience that myself and my late father, my mom went through are just immeasurable.
And what's her living condition like? Paint a picture of a typical family in Xinjiang right now.
we often focus about the people, those 3 million people taken into the modern day concentration camps, and also those sent to the labor camps, producing those 83 global brands, supplying to our markets. The people in the society under surveillance, every aspect of your life, phone calls, communications, social interactions, all surveilled by the CCP. This is why...
And this all started in 2014, 2015.
2016 to be exact. This is why American people need to know that Chinese technology tools, including TikTok, are so dangerous. That's how they built this massive database and round up people, as they said, should be rounded up. That's one the societal aspect. At their homes, they're also being surveilled. The Chinese send about 1 million Chinese cadres to the homes of the Uyghur people, monitoring their communications with their children, even in some instance, making their children to spy on them, asking questions like, do your parents read Quran? Do your parents have a prayer mat? Do your parents teach you to act certain way when we're around? And also there have been sexual violence been reported. I profiled 2 ladies in my book who have experienced similar type of...
And explain that. That's a part of what I want to go over if I want to understand this correctly as I was reading through the summaries in the book. The Communist Party actually sends in the millions
to the homes
their own agents. I don't know how they recruit that many people. I guess they got a lot of people who are willing to do these crazy things, but go live in the home?
Yeah, uninvited, eating with them and sleeping with them.
So
I profiled one of the camps.
And how long is this, like a tour of duty? Is it like a...
They stay for 2 weeks, a
2
week,
weeks, okay.
And then they leave and then come back. And then they engage in sexual molestation as reported. This has been widely reported. And also the most disturbing aspect is to make the kids to spy on their own parents. You know, the very, very important aspect of raising children has also been taken away. There's no privacy, and also you cannot say no. On top of all of this, there have been state-sponsored forced marriage practices also in place. As you know, that China has a disproportionate male population resulting from the family planning. We're talking about 30 million bachelors. They're also forcing Uyghur women. And those marriageable age Uyghur individuals have been taken to the camp, and those are not in the camp have been forced to go through that kind of brutal process.
Right, to just, the goal being to extinguish the ethnic
this is
makeup.
why it was correct legally and policy-wise for the United States government to give this a proper name. In the Genocide Convention, two provisions, 2 key concepts are very clearly been demonstrated. One, purposeful, deliberate prevention of natural population growth. We're talking about significant drop in population growth. 2, forced sterilization. And then the other one is also equally disturbing, taking Uyghur children away from their homes and send them to state-run orphanage. New York Times reported 800,000 Uyghur children being sent to the modern-day children's camps. Wow. In a way, China is also committing genocide against children. When our government called the Ukrainian children being taken to Russia, I was very pleased, but I'm not seeing the similar type of outrage from our government, even though the numbers are much, much higher.
Much higher. They also, as I understand it, they make everyone download an app. I read that in your book too. So the Chinese are having trouble breaking into everybody's iPhone, so they make them download an app that constantly takes note of everything you're doing.
2 ways. One, you have to download the compulsory app that will let the Chinese government or cyber police to monitor real-time all of the communications. This is why in 2016-17, including my own family, told us not to contact, not to come back under any circumstance, because once they have any bit of a traceable information on the phone, you'll be in trouble. On top of that, on the street, they have a mobile data scan station set up. They would just ask you to surrender your phone and go through media scanning. So those 2 ways and also they have QR codes on the doors of the Uyghur homes. They know who live there, what kind of activities, in and out. And then all the apartment complex have facial scan. One of your fellow Texan worked for one of the big multinational corporations, went to Beijing for a business conference and take a detour, wanted to visit the graveyard of his late father Uyghur guy, a very successful businessman in Texas. And then when he showed up at his sister's house, apartment complex, because his face was not profiled, he was not allowed to in. And then when the security called the sister, she said, I'm not going to come out and meet. So the poor guy went all the way from Beijing to Urumqi just to stand in front of the building, could not even see his sister because he was not profiled and the sister was afraid of meeting with an American citizen.
How do they even compile the resources? It's just, if you told me that we were going to put facial recognition locking security software on every single apartment in Houston, Texas, it'd be like, oh God, how much is that going to cost? That's a crazy thing, but they'll do it for this entire region just to keep track of everybody.
This is
the amount of resources. That's what
this is so important. I'm glad that you raised.
Well, the amount of resources that the Chinese are willing to put, whether it's millions of people just to go live in your home, like that by itself is such a mass undertaking. How do you train them to do that? How do you training people to be spies is not the easiest thing in the world.
It boils down to one word: total control. They are willing to. They didn't develop those surveillance apparatus equipment in the Uyghur homeland. They developed it in inner cities, inland China, through the social credit system. And then they take the same equipment to test it and refine it. Sure. And now they're exporting it all around the world. Yeah. So it's metastasized.
It's just a mass. It's just such a mass scale. It's hard for me to imagine some rundown apartment.
It's a political economy.
It's probably a low class, apartment that we would view here in America is not very nice, but it has a facial recognition software on the front. It's crazy. And it's very 1984.
And I can mention. Let me also. The personal data is so important for the Chinese, in the context of competing with the United States and others. That's how they developed AI. This is why the American companies initially were very in tune with working with the Chinese because of that massive amount of personal data available for them.
Right.
Microsoft did the same thing. If they set up the early AI center in cooperation with the Chinese government, as you know that
because they have access to actual data.
Without the data, you can't
build
develop
solid AI.
Yes, so that's part of their overall global ambition and also political economy. They tested. They installed 400 million cameras made by Hikvision. Now they're exporting it. The market is saturated. You cannot just replace camera every other year. So they're looking for places that they can export as part of their soft power projection.
Jeez. Okay, so that's life if you're not in a labor camp.
Yeah.
What's life like in a labor camp? So I assume you get sent to a labor camp if you just don't comply with the rules in some minute way. Or what is the standard? I mean, how bad? What does your behavior have to be like to be sent to a labor camp?
So they have 4 types of camps. We talked about the children's camp, and we have a concentration camp, labor camp,
and they send somebody to a children's camp just because they want children.
Mom and dad are gone.
Mom and dad are gone.
Mom and dad are gone, and either left it at the elderly relatives' care.
Okay.
Or mom and dad are gone. They need to regenerate through this human reengineering by taking the kids to state-run orphanages to indoctrinate them with the Xi Jinping thoughts.
Okay, so they have to be gone at least. So if mom and dad are there and they have a normal family, are their kids being kidnapped? Is that happening?
This is oftentimes the case with the family members who are taken in the camp.
Okay. So so mom and dad get taken to the camps, then they put the kids in the orphanage.
And then justification we're educating them, we're taking care of them.
Sure, I got it. Okay.
And then the what kind of people will send to the labor camp? When you look at those 4 types of camps, initially they took social elites, the scholars, religious leaders, business leaders to the concentration camp. And then the ones who with a good attitude are sent to the labor camp because when you're in labor camp, you have some access to the family members. Actually, that's a preferred method.
Okay.
And what kind of people they took to the labor camp? Like former business owners. I was giving a speech at UCLA Law School. A young student came to me and said, well, can you help me to save my sister? So what happened to your sister? My mom and dad were taken to the camp. She's at home with my 83-year-old grandmother who's very ill. And then I said, what were your parents were doing? He's like, publisher. They have very successful publishing house. But their crime is intoxicating Uyghur minds through the books that they were publishing. So those people, successful business people, were sent to make sneakers.
Jeez, okay. And let's talk about that for a second. So what kind of, you said there's 83 brands that we would probably recognize that can all be traced back to this forced labor.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest brands that we should know
agricultural products, including the ketchup, tomato soup, cotton products, all the undershirt that we wear.
Yeah, I read that 20% of the world's cotton comes from this region.
Yes,
That seems
absolutely.
excessive.
And
Okay.
this going back to a very, very earlier point that we were making, because this is a very rich region with the natural resources, ideal geographical location. Chinese have always been treating this kind of a Chinese California. They have agricultural products, natural gas, rare earth.
Sorry for the buzzing. It's just they're calling votes, so we'll wrap up here soon. But
And
life in Congress.
Yes.
We still don't know why there's like 6 buzzes instead of 3. I have no clue.
It makes it natural.
No clue. Like my staff can't tell me. Nobody can tell me what the freaking buzzers mean. All right.
The most relevant of all of those products in the U.S.-China relations context is the solar panels.
Solar panels, yeah.
Solar panels. I am so grateful to the United States Congress for the decision that members took 2 years ago to pass the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act that makes everything coming from Xinjiang region negative, unless it's proven with evidence.
Sure. Yeah.
So, and this includes auto parts. This includes the groceries, some of the red dates that we see in the Asian grocery stores. Pretty much all of the undershirt made.
Really?
Yeah.
So if you're getting like a cotton undershirt, it says made in China.
Baby pajamas. They were
there's
sending baby pajamas to Costco. The previous administration detected that, stopped that shipment.
Okay.
But we have this problem now. Just testified at the House Ways and Means Committee field hearing on Tuesday. The one issue that Congress immediately should address is to get rid of that de minimis. There's a limit, $800 under, does not go through the taxation, all the process. So the Chinese are still dumping cheap products.
Yeah.
They're available. If you go to Amazon, you can buy the cameras, by those companies that have been entity listed because its price is under 800. So I've been advocating that Congress to look at, to change that. And also this is, the forced labor practices is so toxic, making American people complicit in the ongoing modern day slavery.
What would be like one of the biggest products that listeners listening to our conversation right now could stop buying if they want to stick it to the Chinese Communist Party?
Those people who tried to put solar panel on the rooftop to make them feel great about.
So they're still coming from.
Yeah, it's
even with everything.
Even after the passage of law, the 2 years moratorium were granted to the solar panel industry because somebody made a case, specifically John Kerry, made a case that the American people needs to continue, and we need to. This is the best way to deal with the climate crisis. So we can ignore the human beings, knowing that those solar panels is made with the slave labor, dirty coal.
Don't get me started
with the
on
government
solar
subsidy.
Power as a power to solve the climate crisis in the first place. I think that's also totally wrong. It's crazy because we did, so solar panels are a big one, big human rights issue, big environmental issues too, actually. Because I wonder what the mining operations are like in that region. I wonder if they're clean. I wonder if the environmental standards are up to par.
It's not. Actually,
no,
ironically,
really?
Congressman,
That's really surprising. Can't believe it.
Congressman, ironically, the Uyghur homeland, Xinjiang region, has been the testing ground for nuclear weapons since 1960s.
Oh, that's nice of them.
Yeah. So that gives you an idea. No one talks about the environmental degradation.
Oh, it's
the climate
terrible.
crisis
There's
in that region that the Uyghurs have been subject to.
And it's all over China, but it's especially concentrated because they use your region as just their testing ground for everything they hate.
It started with this style, initially they set up this buffer zone to push back against Soviet incursion.
Yeah.
And then they built this massive military unit called Xinjiang Production Construction Corps, XPCC, that had been sanctioned under the global Magnitsky. And also they stationed large number of Chinese PLA in addition to the testing facility.
So how many people are in all these camps?
Randy Shriver, former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific, said in June 2019, his agency believed that 3 million.
3 million people.
Yeah. And then Chinese own white paper said 1.3 million Uyghurs annually went through a re-education program since 2015.
And, does it really work? Or is the Uyghur population, do you think they can be broken? Or does the Uyghur population, because of all of the events of the last 5-10 years, do do you think the will to fight back will ever be there?
Well, the Uyghur people are fighter by nature. They're the sons of the conquerors. The history of Central Asia. Even the Ottoman Empire was built with built by the Uyghurs' ancestors. They have this fighter spirit that's not going to go away. But what has been damaged significantly is the family. The Chinese have a very specific agenda, breaking the roots, breaking lineage, breaking the origin. They delivered.
Yeah.
So that is irreparable.
We talk about breaking the family through policies here in the United States as this sort of Marxist pathway to government control. And it's important to point to the Uyghur, but in China, they're doing it in a very literal way. Here it's a little more subtle, but it's very, very literal and hands-on. I mean,
absolutely.
It's mind-blowing.
And then the other thing is religious practice. Just anyone who has a strong spirituality can appreciate if somebody forces you to denounce your God day in, day out, making to recite who is your new God, Xi Jinping. That can break your spirit. Yeah. That to me is some of the most damaging, psychologically damaging aspect of what's happening here. And to make the matters worse, I'm so proud of our government, our country, but the rest of the world is still sleeping at switch.
Yeah, this has definitely got a lot more notice in a bipartisan way from the United States. But that's true. It's not something you hear about everywhere else.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's continued momentum on that front. Skepticism on China for so many reasons. Yeah. The days of wondering whether China is going to be a responsible actor in a responsible world order, I think is largely over.
It's not happening.
Yeah.
It will not happen. Instead of us changing them, or even forcing them, or convincing them, persuading them,
but there was a lot of people in denial about that fact for the last 2 decades, and I think that's over. I think that era is
over. And also, I think we were able to find out the symptoms. I think it's time for us to come up with a prescription. Yeah.
Well, a lot of people listen to this podcast, so that's at least one way. And what about your book? I mean, your book is really interesting. Say the name of it, where people can get it.
It's called No Escape, the true story of China's genocide of the Uyghurs. So it was published exactly a year ago. This interview, this conversation is very timely.
Cool.
And the book recently won a Human Rights Literacy Award. It's been published in 3 countries so far. It was my publisher, HarperCollins, told me that it was the only book written while an act of genocide is unfolding. So I
don't know of any other firsthand accounts of this.
No, especially
there might be. I don't want to diminish anybody else who's written a book on this.
Especially, there are a lot of policy, but there's a lot of good books. Danger Zone.
But nobody like you who's lived it.
Yes, the irony is that I was born in a re-education camp, and today we're still talking about similar type of camp 50 some years later.
Yeah.
It's ironic, and it's also heartbreaking to me that the world doesn't seem to learn the lesson. We are allowing history.
One last question, actually. Speaking, there's the world, sure, but one question I had on here that I didn't get to ask: what do people in Shanghai think is going on in Xinjiang province?
Before last November, that white paper protest response to that draconian lockdown, I was very skeptical about the Chinese people's perception, thinking that they just buy into all the propaganda narratives by the.
There's plenty of modern Chinese people who literally don't know what you're talking about.
They come
if you say Tiananmen Square, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly, and this is why.
And they're serious.
This is why they were so irritated when Secretary Pompeo said that CCP does not represent the people of China. So I think they're also equally a victim in this. But at the same time, they cannot express because it's costly for them. I wrote about To China in my book. One is the elite, they can travel around the world, buy homes in Los Angeles, go for shopping in Paris. And those are the people who have access to information, but because life is too good for them, they're not willing to speak. And those who have no access to information are silenced. They just essentially go with the public, the government line.
Yeah, I mean, it's, if you live in a cave your entire life and you see shadows dancing on the wall, this is some parable or something that I'm referring to, and I can't remember the name, but you'll believe that that's what the world is.
Exactly.
And someone showing you the truth, it takes time to get to that truth, and you've got an entirely brainwashed.
And there's a
population.
healthy dose of anti-American propaganda in China.
that's an understatement. Yeah.
Last year, around this time, Secretary Blinken delivered an innocuous China speech. I was there in the audience.
Yeah.
And that speech was not even allowed to be on Weibo.
Right.
They took down in 20 minutes. And
and it's, you got to say, that's why at this point we're like, look, we just have to say it is what it is.
Yeah.
And, declare them the adversary they are.
Yeah, they are.
And just be done with it, because there's been no progress in getting the CCP to normalize with the rest of the world the way we would like. And, and I think that eventually is to their detriment. I mean, I think they make very big strategic errors. The one child policy was the most insane strategic error that'll eventually crush China.
It's creating 70 million labor shortage.
Oh, it's insane.
Yeah.
And their overinvestment, the ghost cities, all of this will eventually come back to home to roost. And I think even decisions to invest in this police state in Xinjiang province, just without any provocation.
Yeah.
That is a strategic blunder, right? It won't materialize right away, but that's not sustainable. So, I'm always bullish on America's ability to defeat China as long as we stick together, and I hope we continue to do that. But unfortunately, we got to go vote on a bill where we're probably not sticking together. So here we go.
Thank you very much for your service. It's an honor to sit down with you, Congressman.
It's been an honor. The honor is mine. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much.